Hello and welcome to today's episode of Digital Identity 360. We're going to do a first today. We actually have two guests and two esteemed guests, and I'd like to start off by introducing Loretta Joseph with the Australian Digital Chamber of Commerce and also Ben Yablon with Salt Lending. So Loretta and Joseph, could you just please just do a very brief introduction of your own backgrounds and just to provide a little bit more color for our audience today?
Hi, Alan. I'm the advisory chair of the Australian Digital Chamber of Commerce. I'm a reformed investment banker. I've traded, I think, most asset classes over the last 37 years, and in 2012, I became a blockchain enthusiast. So I endorsed the technology with governments, industry, and regulators to try and see the responsible adoption of the technology. I also sit on a number of cybersecurity company boards, and I sit a number of blockchain boards.
Excellent. Thank you. And Ben, welcome.
Thank you. Great to be here. My name is Ben Yablon. I'm the co-founder of Salt Lending. Salt is a platform that allows holders of digital assets like Bitcoin, Ethereum, and others to use those assets as collateral for loans denominated in national currencies. Prior to co-founding Salt, I was a financial technology attorney, background in fintech, startup law. I've spent quite a bit of time helping clients through the insolvency process. So I've come into the blockchain space with somewhat of a unique lens in terms of how these assets can be held and protected. So there's a very interesting carryover into the security field that I think would be interesting for a discussion with you. So
fantastic. Great. Thank you both for joining us. And, I think that the topic tees itself up very nicely. This whole series is aptly named Digital Identity 360. And what I'd like to do is really focus on the intersection between digital identities or digital identity as a practice area and blockchain technology. I think there's a lot we could talk about there, and I'd like to dive into that and have a discussion around that. So, Loretta, from where you sit, obviously looking, broadly at an industry level, when you think about blockchain and you think about digital identity, I think there's a lot of ways we could approach sort of, how a digital identity can enable a blockchain scheme to perhaps operate with a higher sense of integrity or perhaps a higher sense of, confidence that, that the identities, that the personas that are engaging within the transactions are in fact who they say they are. But I'd love to hear from you of, when you think about that intersection between the technology sets, where is that magic moment? What really makes this sort of a really interesting combination of technologies?
So for me, the element of trust. I think the digital ID and the cybersecurity element come together with trust. So that inbounds, I think, security, the accuracy of the databases that we're talking about on the blockchain database, the transparency of that database, and the immutability of it. So the technologies collide. I think all of a sudden, in history, we have an immutable, traceable record of people IDs back to the day that identification was made.
Yeah, it's funny. Yeah, I heard, we've talked about this, quite a bit internally, as far as, where and how ThreatMetrix sort of plays specifically with blockchain strategies. And, the one way that we've described it is, in the absence of having sort of an authenticated digital identity, in the blockchain, you'll have, immutable, record keeping of transactions that may or may not be from the people that claim to be who they are. So from where I sit, the digital identity will actually authenticate the person is who they say they are. The blockchain will actually sort of verify sort of that the transaction sort of existed and, and with all the record keeping that goes along with the distributed ledger. But in my view, it's, remember the old commercials of Reese's peanut butter cups, the chocolate and the peanut butter, combining the two. I think it really is a very interesting combination that can work together quite well.
Yeah, I mean, I see there's a implication now, obviously, in the KYC process. There's a lot of sensitive data that's been sent to multiple parties at the moment. A lot of companies are liable for how they're storing that data, and there's lots of honeypots that are open to attack. And this all comes around ID. So yeah, so for me, securing that ID and the risk of people holding data on me and the risk of companies holding data on people, it's an incredible risk that we haven't seen before in history, and it opens up a lot of issues around cybersecurity. So for me, it's the KYC. We stop duplicating it. How does it work on the database, on the immutable database, and how do we prove that the data that goes onto the database and people that say they're on the database, who they are and how they interact with it.
Very good. So Ben, Salt Lending, generally in the online lending space, but you approach it different. It's, in terms of embracing distributed ledger capabilities and blockchain capabilities. So help us understand a little bit more about from where you sit with the business that you're building. What is the role of the blockchain, and where do you see digital identities playing a role in that value chain?
Sure. No, absolutely. As with almost any other entity in the financial services business, we must be focused very heavily on our KYC and AML obligations. So one of our main costs is associated with verifying identity. So as it stands, we use every available tool and are actively looking at other solutions that are coming online very quickly that are using the blockchain to do this in a much, much better way. And my interest actually from Salt's perspective is pretty clear and easy to understand, but there's another blockchain company that I've been working with for several years in the health data space, and identity is a vital concern there as well.
Absolutely, yep.
We've tried to move a medical record from one place to another. It's a cumbersome and challenging proposition. Using the blockchain though, we can now store and secure things like our medical records, and ID plays a crucial role there as the foundational element. So once ID is established, you can then have layers of access stacked on top of it with permissioned access granted to those that need to see it. So ID is the fundamental piece that the blockchain will bring into many other vital service verticals. And I think that health is going to be one of the major markets in at least the next 12 months.
Yeah, very interesting. So your health, certainly, big hot area, lots at stake. Obviously there's a lot of regulatory concerns and requirements to follow along there. And, there are other vertical applications as well. I guess when you think about, other good applications outside of healthcare and outside of moving large blocks of capital, through the system, I guess what other industry applications have you thought through, and where you see this intersection really applying on a global basis?
Well, I think on the software ID, because for me, identity data, if it's held on a blockchain, it's immutable. So that's my data, and a web of trust, I guess, hardens over time on the data, and it's a canonical source of truth on the data. And I think the identity data still remains with the individual and not to the corporation. So, we get permission to see who gets our data. So I find this in the emerging markets up until, we have blockchain technology. How do you put an ID that is verifiable on any sort of data record? And why are we as people giving out, all that hundreds of pieces of information about who we are, people that we really probably don't want to see? And so for me, the self-evident ID in that context is very important. And there's many other use cases we're seeing sort of now about the transfer of credibility of people, voting, land titles, people who say they are to own land, or villages. Anything that's got a registry function, I think, that has identification related back to that registry.
Yeah, we've one interesting application that we've been talking through is in the property and casualty or even life insurance industry space, right? So, healthcare information aside, and even healthcare insurance, but in the other forms of insurance with just disbursement There's certainly a lot of fraud that, it needs to be managed there. There's certainly anti-money laundering concerns that need to be accounted for. And detecting sort of sophisticated fraud rings, with claim stacking, et cetera. I think there's a really interesting application, right? If you've got, verifiable identity signals mapped to sort of, transaction level integrity, that can be, verified, right, against a distributed ledger. I think that's a really interesting combination, to perhaps maybe even one day eliminate, right, any fraudulent activity with respect to claims disbursements,
And I think
and organized crime.
another example is providence of funds when you have charities. So you have a lot of emerging markets now. You've got a lot of big companies that are giving money to a charity, and the end user is not particularly getting the money. So
Yep.
there's a whole middleman involved in that transactional layer. And how does the donor see to where his money goes to the person that's sitting at the village and it's meant to go in Africa? For me, that's a really big use case as well, because we can now track not only the provenance of goods, but the provenance of money, and take out the processes and procedures and the fraudulent activity that has probably, we haven't been up to date because the data hasn't been rich enough or immutable.
It's such a great point. And the fraud element is key, but one of the emerging pieces here that's incredibly noteworthy is the impact that this sort of self-sovereign ID technology will have on refugees.
Yes.
So one of the most vexing problems that compounds as a result of refugee situations is this loss of identity and inability to reclaim whatever was yours from the place that you were placed from. So when we start looking at self-sovereign IDs that are not dependent on a particular company or even a particular nation, very interesting things begin to happen when we're looking at this sort of global phenomenon around refugees.
Yeah, and I think it doesn't stop with just the refugee population. It's also folks in parts of the world that that don't have a physical mailing address. Not necessarily refugees. They just they're a good portion of the Chinese population has no known mailing address, right? Or no social security number, right? So they're so applying a digital identity scheme at the identity level with a distributed ledger blockchain framework to drive authenticated transactional integrity will really empower a good chunk of the population that is either underbanked or underserved or suffering from a refugee situation.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing it in the world at the moment. I mean, we're looking at places like Papua New Guinea and in Africa and India, and if you can start to digitally ID people at a village level, you can start to give them the ability to be banked. You can start to give them the ability to vote. You can start to give them the ability to have title over their land. So there's a whole lot of reasons why you empower people financially that are not included in the financial system.
Yep.
And if you do that on the blockchain from the moment that their ID is now created on, say, a 2G phone that gives you a 14 digit, it can't be taken off the blockchain. Then there's a whole different ecosystem that's developing. For a whole paradigm, the paradigm shift for the emerging markets is so incredibly fundamental to the blockchain technology.
Very good. So I'm going to close this segment today with a power round, and I'm going to ask a question. This was not pre-planned, so for the audience watching. So Ben, we'll start with you. What's your single biggest prediction for 2018 as it relates to the conversation we're having today, the intersection between blockchain and digital identity?
Oh, that's very exciting. Glad you asked that. We're going to see a rapid tokenization of nearly every asset class imaginable. And I think that what that really means is that the way that we interact with value generally is going to be reconsidered in 2018 as a result of our ability to express ownership over, as a result of this sovereign ID, asset classes that were heretofore frozen. So that's what SALT is looking toward in 2018.
Fantastic. And Loretta, what's your prediction?
I think regulators and governments will come together from a collaborative side, not looking at the blockchain or applications of it, like cryptocurrencies has been particularly negative or nefarious, and the blockchain applications will be vast and varied, and there will be a very, very large adoption of blockchain technologies within governments and within regulators and within the industry that we're not even seeing at the moment in 2017.
Okay, so we're going to check in 11 months from now and see how your predictions hold up. But based on the very credible backgrounds you both have, I think you're both onto something, and I suspect your predictions will bear fruit. So with that, I want to thank both of you, Loretta, Ben, for joining us on Digital Identity 360. I thought this was a very interesting conversation, and I hope you found a lot of value out of this too. Thanks very much for joining us.
Oh, it was an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having us, and I look forward to coming back in a year and seeing how far that we've moved.
$100,000 Bitcoin.
There we go. You've heard it here first. Okay.
Derivative on cryptocurrency sends it to a new level.
All right. All right, folks. Thanks a lot, and appreciate your time, Loretta and Ben. Take care.
Thanks, Carmen. See you later.